Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Pragmatic Investor. Today I was joined again by Michael Wiggins. Of course, we took the chance to talk more about energy. We talked about natural gas, nuclear energy, and Michael told us all about the 3Ds, which are deglobalization, decarbonization, and digitalization. Now, we've had some very interesting moves in the energy sector as of late. Natural gas has been rallying, and of course, we've also seen some interesting moves in uranium. And overall, I think this is really a very important time for energy investors, and I think this could set us up for a big rally in the coming year and even decade. It's always a great pleasure to talk to Michael. He's incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to the energy sector, so if you haven't already, go ahead and check out his stuff on Seeking Alpha. And also, if you haven't already, please go ahead, like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using. It would be greatly appreciated. As always, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. All right, welcome back, everybody, and welcome back by popular demand. We have Michael Wiggins with us again. Michael, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, James. Thank you. How you doing? You good?
Yeah, great. All right, so of course we're going to talk about energy today. I want to start off maybe with the topic of China, because we have had some interesting news coming out of China. The PBOC is going to be issuing some more stimulus. The idea now, consensus amongst economists, is more fiscal stimulus. Of course, that is in response to the Chinese economy slowing down, and China is a big part of the whole global energy puzzle, isn't it, Michael?
Basically, in my view, this plays into what I call the triple Ds, which is deglobalization, decarbonization, and digitalization. So when everyone thinks about deglobalization, a lot of people are thinking about how the West is taking supply away from China. But at the same time, actually happening here is that China is trying to decouple from the West as well. So one example here can be in the semiconductor industry, how they're trying to have less dependency on the US. So for example, the Chinese Made by China 2025 mandate is to really put semiconductor industry at the core here of what's going to be their technological drivers. And they're quite good at this. When they really focus on something, they seem to have this kind of vision and they kind of really run with it. And we saw this in the decade of the 2010s, how they did with the internet boom. So when they really are focused about something, this can be a meaningful driver. So what happens with this deglobalization is that you end up with quite a lot of redundancy, okay? So in China, they end up building a lot of construction. And here in the US and in the Western world, we also end up building a lot. But there is a bit of period of inefficiency, okay? So everyone's kind of thinking, oh, China's going to go for this lockdown. When they come out, it's going to be the same as it was in the West, the great reopening. It didn't work out like that. And everyone's like, okay, China's dead. Forget China. China's dead. But what's actually happened is that we are decoupling from our investments in China. So, for example, let's say you're Tesla, you might not be as acutely interested in investing in China. So you kind of pull that back slightly. But just because you pull it back 1 month doesn't mean it shows up next month somewhere else. So there's a bit of a kind of a lull period. And it's in this lull period that everyone's kind of trying to catch the trend. And whilst I do believe that it's very important to think about a secular trend, it can be a bit choppy. So the best way that I can think about it is what happened during the pandemic in a lot of companies, there was an acceleration and everyone kind of got caught off guard and everyone's like, okay, everything is going to go digital. I'm obviously rewinding the clock here like to about 2020 when everything went up in the air and everyone saw an acceleration. And then once we came to compare to the comparables 2 years later, it's a period of digestion. Nothing fundamentally has really changed. It's still the same secular trend. This is a period of digestion. Now, why with China, it's the same thing here. So they are still going to be very much investing in energy. They're very much investing in making sure that they have the energy security. And nowadays, right at this moment, we're kind of middle of summer 2023, people not really thinking about energy security. That's such a 2022 frame of mind. But that's because there's been this kind of lull in energy prices. So everyone's like, oh, energy, forget that. But energy is crucial for everything, and predominantly to make our AI transition. That's going to be the limiting factor here. I believe that it's not going to be that difficult to ramp up the amount of energy that you need, but you need to have access to very cheap energy around the world so you can run forward with this AI transition. So rather than having, let's say, case in point, something like AWS, which is massive, right? All that data going to one provider, you're going to have lots of small specialized offerings. Now, with AWS, what happened was that they had about 5 or 6 years advancement on everyone else. So when Microsoft came in, there's a famous Buffett quote that, oh, you don't go and give Jeff Bezos a 7 years advantage because it'll just dominate that market. So with AI, everyone's like, oh, AI has been around for a long time. But this version of AI is modern and it's cutting edge, and everyone is after it. It doesn't matter if it's Meta, it doesn't matter if it's Google, it doesn't matter like it's AWS, it's Microsoft, everyone is after this. And it very much depends on within what niche, how much you're going to need. But if you were a CEO of a company in the Fortune 500, and today you're not asking yourself, how will I be able to use AI, and how will my business be disrupted by AI, you're going to be left behind. So everyone is chasing around and trying to figure out as they go. So in this period, going back to China, is a period where we're going to see a lot of energy demand coming up in the next several years. And just finally, just to wrap this up, because this is so important, it's happening right now in these days, is about natural gas. So natural gas provides approximately in the ballpark of, let's say, depends on the country, but in the ballpark of 20 to 30% of the electricity, okay? Now, when we're trying, that's the third anchor about when I said at the start, digitalization is the third anchor here. So it is deglobalization, decarbonization, and digitalization. To run all that AI power, you need a lot of electricity. In a fridge, James, in the future, they're going to say, oh, James, you've eaten a lot of calories today. You better not eat so many calories, maybe consider this type of food. When you have your coffee machine, they're going to be like, okay, those beans might not be the best for that type of meal that you ate. When you go and put your dishwasher, says, have you thought about consuming less energy? So all our appliances, all our wearables, all our mobiles, all the technology is going to have AI on it. And the limitation there is having access to cheap electricity. So electricity around the world comes predominantly from natural gas, right? So in Europe right now, everyone's like, okay, we don't need like natural gas. Everyone's like, okay, natural gas, forget it. And we went through a period of just being lulled into inactivity. So in the last several months, the natural gas prices fell down, and everyone's like, okay, well, forget it. We don't really need to worry about it. But now all of a sudden, it's going to get a bit warm in China, and everyone's like, let's get hold of some cargo of liquefied natural gas cargo to come to make sure we got enough to get over this winter period. And China's like, okay, we actually need the natural gas as well. So what's happening right now? You have two different completing trends. You have the demand for energy going up in terms of in the next several years in terms of AI and computing horsepower, and at the same time you're having to decarbonize the world. And we're trying to say, okay, we are in this energy transition, and how are we going to go about actually removing our supply from coal, from natural gas. So it's a period of everyone kind of saying having one aspiration, but I think that underneath all that, the reality is that this energy security problem is still with us and is still very real.
Right. As you put it there, you have those 3Ds, right? We talk about digitalization. I still remember in our last podcast, you talked about the energy expenditure of ChatGPT. Very interesting data point there. Then, of course, we also have deglobalization, how that is going to affect everything. And absolutely, we're seeing those companies like Apple moving away from China, maybe into areas of Southeast Asia, India, for example. And then, of course, we have
decarbonization.
Decarbonization, of course. Now, would it be safe to say, because decarbonization, you talk about moving away from fossil fuels and natural gas is kind of a bit less carbon intensive, right? I always think about natural gas as
So
kind of
it's
being that step in between, right?
Mhm. So the way that they describe it in COP27, it's the greenest or the cleanest of the fossil fuels. So natural gas is approximately 40% less carbon intensive than coal, okay? So around the world, the US, everywhere, we use a substantial amount of coal. But the goal is to get rid of some of that coal and to replace it with natural gas, the stepping stone, the bridge fuel. So you can make an assertion and that natural gas is a bridge to nuclear and renewables, or you can make the assertion that you cannot replace natural gas, that is a destination fuel. You cannot make nitrogen fertilizer without natural gas. You can't make well, you could, but it's expensive to replace natural gas with when you're making aluminium. So there are certain aspects here that make it irreplaceable. At the same time, when everyone is thinking about this green transition, everyone's trying to kind of chip away at using something. But despite all the investment that we have made in this renewable transition globally, around something like 4-5% of the renewables is what makes up our whole energy supply. So we're investing about close to $1 trillion on this kind of transition towards renewables, but around the world, we're still about 80% dependent on fossil fuels. There is, you can't really get rid of these heavy oils. If you want to ship something, our economy is reliant on shipping stuff around the world, okay? And you cannot ship something that's, let's say, several 100,000 tons heavy with anything else, right? You need those heavy kerosene oils. You can't transport me over to somewhere to like Spain without putting people on a plane, and those you need the heavy oils. It's just simple, right? So there are some aspects that there's non-negotiable. We will have to use fossil fuels, but there's other things. For example, electricity. The aspiration is to get more of that energy supply coming from, let's say, solar panels, coming from wind turbines. But the problem here is two things. Number one, those energy sources are intermittent. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you think about that, right? So you need energy in the evening, you need energy in the morning, right? So that's mostly in the evening. So when you come home, like in normal temperature, not in the middle of summer, you come home, you put your heating on, right? So you put a heat pump on in the future. Let's say you have a heat pump, that's electricity. So you need that charging at night. You also need to charge your EV vehicle, okay? So these are two things that are very, very much energy intensive. You're going to charge them in the evening, okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with intermittent sources of energy as long as you factor that in. That's why you need batteries. That's why you just need to figure out, okay, this is the electrical grid. This is where we're going to put all those solar panels, all those wind turbines. And from that point where you make the solar panels, and when you install the wind turbine, from that point to the highly dense populated area, you need to have along the way certain checkpoints where you're storing that energy, because you don't know where that energy is going to go, right? You might go to New York, you might go somewhere else, Florida, and you need to have that capacity along the way. So it's not impossible. It's just that people need to figure out some way of managing this situation. So a solution to optimize this energy transition in terms of how do you optimize the efficiency of this energy. So it's one thing to say, okay, I really want to kind of, like in a small country, for example, I don't know, like Norway or whatever, you want to kind of change how you supply that. It's easier to do in a small country, but once you get into a very densely populated place like China, it's kind of more difficult. And you competing for resources, right? Because when you are trying to go on this renewable energy transition, you have to build that. So to build like a wind turbine or to build a solar panel, you need steel. You need a lot of steel, and that's really energy intensive. So you need, for example, in the case of steel, you need a metallurgical coal. So it's a different type of coal. It's not the same coal as you use to for. It's not thermal coal that you use for electricity, but you need that high energy intensity input to make some of these components. So it's all well and good for us to say, okay, we want to kind of go on a pathway towards become net zero. Another way to do it is to supplement some of that energy transition with, let's say, nuclear power. So in the past several days, really, the price of uranium has come up significantly. Now, no one knows how like what's going to happen here, and prices never go to the sky, and it's always up and down. So just because it's up now doesn't mean anything. It can be back down, and things don't go in a straight line. Okay, but what is critically important here is to think about this, right? So nobody was really interested in uranium for the past, let's say, 3 years. And then about 2 years ago, there was kind of a bit more interest in that space. But politically, it was still kind of like seen as not that interesting, even though it has it's no carbon, it's highly reliable, it's flexible, and it's cheap. Okay, so it has a lot of attributes that can easily replace fossil fuels. It has you can scale quite easily with it. Okay, but in the last several weeks, we've seen the US Senate attempt to pass a bill to expedite the use of small modular reactors. Now, what happens here is that it's kind of like a stepping stone. So rather than having these large nuclear plants, you end up with these small modular reactors. They do use less uranium, but because there's more of them, you end up using significantly more than you would if you didn't have them. So it's like a stepping stone. So it's, how they say about energy, that it's all of the above. It's not going to be good enough for, let's say, France to dislodge their use away from, let's say, nuclear, but for certain countries or even certain areas within a country, it might make more sense to have, let's say, wind turbines, or it might make more sense to have a uranium source of energy. So you need several different ways, and it's not like one bullet to solve all crises. You need a few different approaches how you tackle this problem.
Absolutely. I think that fits in very well with what you said before about deglobalization, because I'm looking at some headlines here. It says China has about somewhere within 22, 24 nuclear reactors or units, they're calling them, under construction. And I feel like that might be a bit of a catalyst, right? Because as soon as China starts using this kind of what you might call cheap and reliable energy source, the US has no choice, right? The rest of the nations have to go with it. Otherwise, they're gonna be left in the dust, right? So you recently wrote an article about a uranium stock, Cameco. So tell us a bit more about that and maybe how investors can profit from this in a more actionable way.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. Sometimes I kind of say a lot and it's difficult for me to actually, unless someone stops me and says, how can I express that? So a lot of investors will naturally go towards the Sprott ETF, okay? And people can just Google that. So the Sprott ETF is a way to get exposure to uranium prices. The disadvantage is that it just tracks to a large extent the uranium price. Okay, what they do is that once the price of the Sprott goes above the net asset value, they take that capital and they buy up the uranium, they store it. Okay, so it's a long only vehicle. It means that it just tracks the price of uranium on the way up, and when the price of uranium kind of slows down, it just stagnates like that. Okay, so there's not a lot of downside. This is the great appeal of it. Okay, you just kind of sit around for the journey. Now, a lot of people believe that there's going to be a uranium squeeze in the market. Okay, I'll just explain that in case your viewers are not familiar with that. So the idea here is that we need, let's say, 190 million tons of pounds of uranium in a year, and we're only producing about 150. Now, that idea, I don't buy it, because for there to be a squeeze, it's kind of like, the Nassim Taleb black swan. A squeeze, by definition, is when nobody is really following it, okay? It's when people are kind of taken off guard. You saw this with natural gas what happened in 2022. So you saw it with fertilizer stocks. It's like it's when people and not expecting it. When everyone is on Twitter talking about uranium prices going to the moon, like that just by definition is not going to happen, because the utilities that buy up this uranium, they are not just sitting around. They're planning, they're contracting out, and this takes me to Cameco. So Cameco is one of the largest uranium producers in the world. It's based in. So the other one, the biggest one, is Kazakh and I'll come to that one in a minute. So with Cameco, it's a bit more leveraged, as in there's a bit more upside and uranium. Okay, so exit, there's minimal downside, and that's fantastic for a lot of people. That's the best vehicle. Cameco is a bit more volatile. Okay, so with Cameco, they contract out the uranium several years in advance, about 2 years in advance. They kind of say, okay, pay us, let's say, for example, $60 per pound, and we'll ensure that you get your uranium. Okay, and for Cameco, it gives them the certainty that they know how much to get out of the ground. And if you know how much to get out of the ground, you hire people, you control your costs, and you get a certain amount of upside because you just have that predictability. Now, the reason why, for example, I don't like Cameco and I own Uranium Energy Corp, UEC, is because what UEC has rather than Cameco is unhedged. So that means that they are not contracted out, right? So if, for example, the price of uranium goes to $60 per pound and stays there for a considerable number of months, they can start to ramp up their production, okay? And they, unlike Cameco, that they're guaranteed to get a certain amount a certain amount for their pounds of uranium. If, for example, the price of uranium was to go to, let's say, 65 or 70, Cameco wouldn't really participate in that, whereas UEC would participate because they are just unhedged. So the more it goes up, they're assuming, which it would to a certain extent, the costs of getting that out of the ground remains relatively stable, adjusted for inflation. You get a lot of that upside percolating down to the bottom line. So you get a lot more leverage out of that. Now, this same thesis that I told you, I could have told you anytime in the last 2 years. That has been the pervasive thesis for a long time. But up until now, the price of uranium has been really, really just kind of quite a boring thing. But in the last several weeks, there's been this kind of jump. And why I believe that is two main factors, really, is people trying to think a bit more about this energy transition. And secondly, politically, it's not viewed as such a negative thing anymore. It's like people say, you know what, maybe nuclear energy is not such a bad thing. It's carbon neutral. It gives you a lot of reliable energy. It's flexible. It's cheap, and there are different arguments for it. Now, just one more thing about Kazakh that I said at the start. So Kazakh makes a lot of this uranium. The problem is that to get it out of Kazakhstan, you need to go into St. Peter's in Russia, and you need to export it by boat out of there.
Right.
And that hasn't been really prohibited, but a lot of Western countries are no longer willing to buy that because they believe it could indirectly benefit Russia's economy. Now, I pass no judgment on that. What I will say is that for a lot of insurers, they're not willing to pay to insure the cargo coming out of Russia because something could happen. Some stray drone fires something that goes, a bit awful. And how would the insurance be willing to take that bet? How they underwrite that ship, that cargo? So there's a bit of a restriction on the amount coming out. Now, that doesn't stop Kazakh from selling it elsewhere, China, for example. But when historically people have been buying their uranium pounds kind of via Russia, it kind of just makes it an extra friction here. So going back why uranium price is kind of going higher is really that idea that there's a bit of a geopolitical angle here. I don't want to overdrum or go on that too much, but there is a bit of a friction getting that out of Kazakhstan. And then also politically, it's not seen as the worst evil right now. So, and just finally, the negative argument for uranium is that for the past, let's say, for example, 2 years or so, all this that I've said, everyone's known about it. But the problem with the uranium market is quite opaque. It's really quite difficult to know who is supplying the uranium to the spot market. And the reason is that there's a lot of secondary supply on the fringes, and it's been the case that for several years, you can just get hold of it. You can just call a broker, the broker phones up someone else. It's a bit more, has a bit more friction in the process than, let's say, buying oil, for example. But you can get hold of that secondary supply, and no one has any idea how much of that secondary supply of uranium there's still out there. So there's still a bit of uncertainty, and that's why, to a large extent, the uranium stocks haven't really jumped significantly higher. And I'll just finish by saying that on the other side of the equation, if you look at Cameco, it's up about 38 or 40% in this year. So it's doing significantly better than a lot of other stocks out there. So you can't really say that investors is skewing that. It's not that investors are not interested in let's say, in nuclear participation. It's just that maybe hasn't made that many headlines. But over the next several months, people will say, oh, you know what, actually, let's get invested in uranium. And once they look at the price of Cameco, they may consider looking to some of these other secondary businesses.
It's very interesting. Obviously, we have those geopolitical challenges when it comes to investing in energy. I like the idea that you mentioned before about the company being unhedged. I remember that's kind of a point you made also with Antero Resources, one of the companies we talked about in our previous podcast. Now, to wrap up before we go off, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the semiconductors, the AI revolution that's been happening. Obviously, it's interesting. People talk about semiconductors, microchips as, the pick and shovel play, right? You sell the tools needed to carry out this AI revolution. That seems a bit overplayed. I want to talk about the pick and shovel of the pick and shovel, right? Which would be, what are the commodities that are behind these chips? And what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that you also cover commodities a lot. And I've recently been talking to my subscribers about copper, which I find quite interesting. What are your thoughts on these commodities in the light of this kind of AI and chip revolution?
So there's a few different things. So the chips are made from silicon, and silicon is not that expensive to get hold of. So the idea of investing in, let's say, for example, something like NVIDIA that's most likely the number one winner, okay, in this space, okay? But then the counter argument is, yes, I recognize that, and everyone else recognizes that, but is there a way to participate indirectly on this thesis? So I believe that, I say that AI is going to be massive, but is there a way? That's the way I think about how to indirectly participate in this inflection. So the way I describe myself as an inflection investor, how can I position myself into commodities and businesses that in the next 2 years they're going to do reasonably better than expectations are right now? So, for example, I invest in this business called Tech Resources, and that's a bit of a business that I kind of enjoy investing in because it has what I call two catalysts, okay? So Tech Resources is, for the most part, a copper business, but it also has a coal business associated with it, okay? And because it has the coal and the copper, it's kind of like not that attractive to institutions, because not a lot of institutions want to invest in a business that is, is not ESG friendly because it has the copper business. So what they're trying to consider is some way of spinning off that coal business. Now, it has been temporarily, or it has for now kind of hit a bit of a snag because they didn't get the approval to spin it off cleanly. So it's kind of like a question mark, but it's in the process right now of cleaning up. So I don't know how it's going to clean up, but it's very much in the works. They're going to get rid of this coal business. I don't know if they spin it off to Glencore or if I don't know, basically. There's a spin-off happening, and you're going to end up with just the copper business. And like your viewers don't have to consider necessarily just tech resources. There are other businesses, but I believe that tech resources is significantly cheaper than its comparables like Freeport. And so when you look at it, there's two catalysts here, okay? So to build AI, you need a lot of electrification. And we kind of touched on this at the start. So it's the rewiring of the grid. So that's what I talked about, kind of digitalization, everything that needs to be kind of electricity, digital. So to get that, you need to make sure that the electrical grid can sustain that charge that comes from running AI training and AI inference. So these are very energy intensive. For people who haven't seen the video before, the way I talked about it is the ChatGPT consumes about, to train the model once, consumes about the same as 200,000 houses in the US use in a year. Okay, so it's really energy intensive. Now think about Meta having it and AWS having it and like whoever else, Alibaba having it. So if everyone is doing this kind of training, you're going to need a lot of the rewiring of the electricity. And to do that, you need two main components. You need aluminium and you need copper, and you also need to hold up these the electrical grid. So in these type of commodities, these building commodities that everyone's like thinking are directly associated with China. My contention is that it's not really going to be the case over the next 3-4 years going forward, as it has been in the previous cycle. In the previous cycle, so investors like to think in patterns of what happened in the past. So yes, admittedly, in the past, steel was directly correlated to real estate in China. But right now, I believe that through this decoupling, there's going to be a lot more happening in the construction in the US. So if you see, there are two bills in the US. There's the IRA, Infrastructure Reduction Act, and I think it's the other one's called IIJA. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a construction bill. So there are two large bills that are going to stimulate the construction of this whole re-electrification. So when you look at, let's say, copper and steel, which are going to be like two main beneficiaries of this, nobody's really thinking about it. You look at, let's say, copper equities, and you look at steel equities. Those equities are like just dead. No one's. And you compare that with, let's say, all these AI plays. They're just going to the moon, and it's not to say that they will not continue to go to the moon for a prolonged period of time, but the expectations are there already for them to go to the moon. So they have to live up and surpass that expectation. Whereas with these, let's say, steel, I own United States Steel, and the expectation is not really there, right? And again, let's say, for example, I own United States Steel, so there's my, I do have a bias for it, but it's a business that everyone thinks is dead in the water. But what they did in 2022 and 23, they were constructing a lot. So they were really CapEx heavy. And starting 2024, they've built their River 2 mine, and they're going to be cutting back on their CapEx. So just naturally, the amount of free cash flow that's going to make is going to be growing quite significantly. So there's different trends here to participate in AI. So just to sum it up, it's important when you think about investing in a commodity. Number one thing, think about the balance sheet. Okay, there's too many commodities there with businesses that have frail balance sheets. You don't have to pick. A lot of the times, the discrepancy that you're getting for getting a good balance sheet and a bad one is like you're not really paying a big difference. So you might as well just search for a business that has a good balance sheet. Okay, that's the first most important thing. The second thing, if possible, try to pick businesses that have two catalysts. So I talked about tech resources, how they're spinning off their coal business. So that's going to give them a re-rating as a pure play copper business. And I talked about United States Steel, how they're cutting back on the capex that they're going to have in the next year. So you are going to participate in the increase of the underlying commodities. For example, I believe strongly that copper prices are going to continue to go higher in the next 2-3 years. So you're participating on the uprise of that copper price, but you don't need that because you also have the catalyst where the business is spun off as the coal business. So you're just going to get a natural re-rating of tech. Maybe they'll even label the company something different, and maybe like it'll be like a copper 2.0, whatever, copper with a Z on the end or something like that, just to make it jazzy, and you kind of get a re-rating close to something, let's say, to some of their peers. And the same here with United States Steel. So you're gonna see them cut back on their capex, and I believe that you're gonna see steel prices coming up. So at the start of the conversation, we talked about China stimulating their economy, and this is one of the things that they've talked about. They've talked about stimulating their construction, and you've seen that in the last several days, really, with steel prices kind of they hit like a bottom and they kind of started coming back up again. So it's important to think about, in conclusion, the balance sheet. Whenever possible, think about the secular wins that are going to take the business forward. Think about the valuation. Really, the free cash flow is so critical. Try to pay, if possible, less than, let's say, 6 times free cash flow for a business that in the next 2 years is going to be in a stronger position.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Like I was saying before, I've recently talked to my subscribers about copper, kind of based on that idea of China, which I don't kind of contradicts a little bit what you said, because you said that that link is maybe broken. I pointed out that there has traditionally been a very strong link between copper. It's kind of a proxy for the Chinese economy. So I was saying this is a kind of safe way of, investing in China without investing in China. And plus you get the upside of, like you say, owning something that is, has much larger tailwinds behind it. Then I also find it very interesting what you said about infrastructure, because I was talking to a fellow essay contributor, Trading Places Research. We talked a lot about AI. That's his area of expertise. But then when I asked him to make a stock pick, he told me about some companies in the infrastructure business, also talking about some of those big plans in the US, a lot of spending coming into that infrastructure, which kind of very much in line with what you were talking about, I think.
So, like, obviously, there are different ways to think about this. Your way can be right, and mine can be wrong, or like, doesn't matter. So the way that I see it is that you need in the West to rebuild the electrical grid. And the reason for that is that there's the thesis behind a lot of people that we are having so many more efficiencies that we don't really need to build out the electrical grid in the US, for example. And I categorically see that differently. I honestly believe that we really want to ramp up the horsepower in terms of how much energy we use via electricity. So it's not only really the US, but really when you think about it, around the world, everyone wants to live up and aspire to have the same quality of life as they do in the US. And to get that, you need access to cheap energy. And the way to get that is really by having this supply situation sorted out in terms of how you get the energy and how you transmit it across. So just to wrap up very briefly, I think that's going to be quite interesting in the next several years to think about batteries and how I'm invested in lithium, so that's why I said it. But how to think about across different points, how you're going to be able to store that energy across the way, because the energy transition is by definition, how do you store that intermittent energy? Because you get energy maybe not at the time that you really need it. So I think that's going to be something that's quite interesting and worth kind of following.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you about lithium batteries before we finished off. Obviously, you said that you're invested in lithium, so that's something that you see as a bullish outlook on lithium.
Yeah, so I believe I'm invested in ALB, Albemarle. I believe that this is a good way to invest in lithium. There are other lithium plays. For example, a lot of people like SQM, Sociedad Química Mineral, SQM. And so a lot of people like that because it's a lot cheaper than Albemarle. But I don't think that necessarily just because something is cheaper is offering necessarily better value. So I know a lot of value investors kind of say, okay, I'm going to go for this because it's cheaper than that. But I think that although that sometimes does play out, and I think that sometimes is helpful, I don't think it's always helpful. In investing, it's a lot of that kind of idea that a half truth is worse than a lie. So you kind of go with something that kind of has a bit of grain of truth to it, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt and have to think it through sometimes a bit more. So I believe that ALB is a better investment because it's a large company, better quality of management, and I think that they also have a much more clear vision in terms of their capital allocation. And you can see that in the way that they talk about their projections over the next several years. So the stock, it's kind of complicated, right? So the stock is priced at approximately, let's say, I don't know, like 8 or 9 times earnings, but it seems cheap. But the reason is that they have a lot of capex. Now, you can make the case that, for example, that those earnings don't really mean much because they're having to reinvest quite significantly. But the other side of the equation that I'll take is that if the business is growing on the top line by approximately 40-45%, as they've recently guided to, why shouldn't you invest? You should invest as much as you possibly can. If you're getting that much market share, you should just go all out. As long as you're making sure that the business is going to be free cash flow break even, you just run through it. And that's what they're saying. They're pretty much saying that this year, they're already going to be free cash flow break even. I estimate maybe that they're going to make around 500 million of free cash flow next year. Perhaps, I don't know, I don't want to look too much into the future, but that could double to 1 billion the following year, perhaps even more. But it's important to think about the whole energy transition is contingent on being able to store that energy somewhere.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. If we can't store the energy, right, what are you going to do with all that energy, especially coming from the renewables? And like you say about the companies, as investors, it's important to look at those nuances, right? I mean, in accounting, you can maximize for cash flow, you can maximize for other things, So again, depending on the objective of the company, cash flow might not be so important given that. Just before we go, I also want to throw one last question at you, Michael, if that's all right. I'm very curious to know, what are your thoughts on hydrogen? Because hydrogen energy is something that has kind of been around for a while.
You cut out. Can you?
Yeah, my question was on hydrogen energy. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because that's kind of been around for like years and years as this kind of panacea of the future. It hasn't quite panned out. And there's some interesting companies in the sector, but well, it hasn't quite panned out yet. I was wondering what your thoughts are.
So I don't know much about it. All I know is that Václav Smil is someone that I really follow, and he doesn't seem to believe that it's going to be scalable enough to scale it at a commercial level. So if someone like Václav Smil, maybe some of your listeners know who he is if someone like that speaks about energy and doesn't believe in the prospects of hydrogen as a scalable commercial enterprise, I'll defer to someone that is a bit kind of better than me to understand this kind of stuff. And I'll say, okay, I don't need to chase that. There's plenty of other things to chase around.
All right, Michael, once again, thank you so much for coming on. You've given us a lot to think about. You've given us some great picks, some great names, and a lot of very good insights into the energy sector. So once again, Michael, thanks for coming on the show.
I want to say thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it. And I cannot wait to come back next time. Thank you so much.
All right, Michael. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Once again, everyone, thanks for listening to The Pragmatic Investor. If you aren't already, please go ahead and follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever it is that you're listening to the podcast. And remember that if you'd like more content on investing, I do a lot more on Seeking Alpha. You can find me there, James Ford, The Pragmatic Investor, where I cover crypto, the macro outlook, international stocks, and so much more.